In the light of truth, with love of our guide, and with hope for tomorrow, we gather together to celebrate life and our service to the world. Welcome. Thank you, chorus. That was beautiful. Our reading this morning is an excerpt taken from the book Touching Spirit Bearer by Ben Michelson. This is a young adult novel. It describes a teenage boy named Cole who grew up with abusive parents. His anger about the past was expressed in destructive acts against people in the community, and Cole was arrested. The California court where he was tried sometimes used alternative sentencing and in his case, he had a choice of being involved in the Native American circle justice. So rather than spending a year in prison, he spent a year on this island with a Native American guide named Edwin. Edwin teaches him about survival and how to deal with his anger. And one of the first lessons involved getting up early every day and jumping into a freezing lake. Cole hugged his arms to his chest, but couldn't stop his teeth from chattering. The water nearly covered his shoulders. He felt stupid and vulnerable. What was he doing 1,000,000 miles from nowhere, sitting in a freezing pond beside a bizarre Tlingit Indian with a stick? "What's the stick for?" he asked loudly. Edwin opened his eyes as if coming out of a sleep. Calmly, he held up the stick. "The right end of the stick is your happiness. The left end is your anger." He handed the stick to Cole. "Break off the left end and get rid of your anger." Shivering, Cole took the stick in his fist and broke off one side. Edwin shook his head. "You broke off the left end, but a left end still exists. Go ahead, break it off again." Again, Cole broke the stick, and again Edwin shook his head. "Why did you leave the left end on the stick when I asked you to break it off?" "Well, that's stupid," Cole muttered. "The left end will always be there." Edwin nodded. People spend lifetimes breaking their stick to get rid of anger, but always anger remains and they think they failed. "So if I can't ever get rid of my anger, why even try?" asked Cole. Edwin reached and took the piece of stick from Cole's hand. His fingers toyed with the wood as he looked up at the sunrise that had begun to glow warmly over the trees. Then he glanced over his shoulder at the dark storm clouds that hung menacingly on the opposite horizon. He waved the stick. "Is the sky sunny or is it stormy?" he asked. Cole looked both ways and shrugged. "Depends on which way you look." "If you looked only at the clouds, what would you say?" "Stormy." "Yes, and what would you say if you looked only at the sunrise?" Cole's body had grown numb from the icy water, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably. "Sunny," he grunted impatiently. Edwin waved the stick in a circle. "The sky, this stick, hot dogs, life, it's all the same. It's what you make of it. What you focus on becomes reality. Everybody carries anger inside, but also happiness. Those who focus on anger will always be angry. Those who focus on happiness will..." "I don't have a choice," Cole interrupted. "I can't help it. I don't go to bed and decide I'm going to stay awake all night and be mad." "Have you been angry since you entered the pool today?" "No," said Cole, "because I'm freezing my butt off." Edwin smiled. "When I was banished to this island, I came to this pond to get rid of my anger. It gave..." "You just said you can't get rid of anger," Cole argued. "This pond gave me a choice. I could focus on the left end or the right end of the stick. I could focus on the sunrise or the dark clouds. It was my choice. So unless I go somewhere and freeze every morning, I'll keep getting mad, huh? Edwin smiled, but shook his head. You only look at the left end of the stick and at the cloudy sky because your experiences in life have made this habit. Happiness, like anger, is also a habit. You learn to be happy one day at a time, but habits change hard. This pool will help you. Cole turned to Edwin. You know, the stuff you just told me makes more sense than all the weird things that counselors and psychologists have told me in school and at the detention center. Edwin tapped Cole's shoulder with the broken stick. That's because those people still think you can get rid of the left end of the stick. Please forgive me and ignore the title of this sermon. Forgiveness is not a four-letter word. Forgiveness is not love. To explain, Reverend Peter chose the theme of renewal for this month, and I wanted to take a different approach on the topic, so I decided to talk about the renewal of relationships. And how do relationships become renewed? As I saw it before I started reading and thinking, I thought it was through the act of forgiving. That if you had sufficient love for someone, then you could forgive them and repair the relationship. But I was wrong. I fell into the trap that many people do, thinking that forgiveness is the same thing as reconciliation. They're similar, but different. So once my understanding of forgiveness began to become more clear, it became evident that I needed to revamp my original sermon topic. So today I will not talk to you about renewing relationships with others through forgiveness. I will talk to you about renewing relationships with ourselves, our very souls, through forgiveness. First, a little background about how most of us view forgiveness. When people think about it, their first thought is often associated by being forgiven by God for some misdeed or sin. Christians, Jews, and people of other faiths look to some divine source for forgiveness and absolution. And while it's true that religions teach people to forgive others for their wrongdoings, it is God that ultimately forgives. For example, the Jewish people recently celebrated what is called the High Holy Days. It started with Rosh Hashanah on September 24th and ended with Yom Kippur on October 4th. On Rosh Hashanah, it said that God opens the book of life to write down each person's fate for the coming year. It's followed by a brief period of time called the Days of Awe. It's a time in which the Jews seek to be worthy of God's forgiveness by attempting to right wrongs they've committed, both to other people and to God. Then on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the people confess their guilt before God and others and ask forgiveness before God seals their fate in the book of life. In Christianity, it's taught that Jesus died on the cross to atone for the sins of humanity. And even though believers are assured of forgiveness, Jesus also teaches that we must forgive others in order to be forgiven by God. Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 and 15 say, "For if you forgive others your trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." I find that to be an interesting paradox, but that's another sermon. But as I interpret these teachings, It is God that ultimately forgives. And we need to follow this model because forgiving is the right thing to do. And so the story of the prodigal son represents this model of forgiveness. You know the story. The younger son asks his father for his inheritance, leaves home, squanders his money, returns home flat broke after living it up. The older brother, meanwhile, stays home, works the farm, is devoted to his father. But yet when the father welcomes the younger brother home, the older brother gets angry. And the father says, "No, we must rejoice that the younger son is no longer lost and that he's home safe." In taking this story at face value, I can see how the older brother might resent the treatment of the younger. I can see how he could be angry. But in the grand scheme of things, the younger brother's transgression wasn't horrific. It didn't really hurt anyone except himself. It would be fairly easy to forgive him, I think. But what if the younger son, while out on a drunken night out in the town, had killed the older brother in a brawl? What then? Would the father forgive that? How do you forgive when there is deep pain inflicted? Should such things be forgiven at all? And so we come to the crux of the issue of forgiveness, and that is coming to an understanding of what it is and what it isn't. I've come to understand that forgiveness is a private, internal process of letting go of the anger, rage, fear, pain, or resentment that we feel when we've experienced some sort of harm by others. It does not require an external source, a divine source, or any other participant. It's a process of grieving the loss of trust, whether that trust was in a specific person, a community, or even a whole society. And it's a process of relinquishing that psychological hold that the anger and pain and resentment has on us. And it's also a process of regaining control of our sense of power. In comparison, reconciliation is between two or more parties who have agreed to try to work together to repair the relationship. So it's possible to forgive without reconciling. And sometimes it's not possible to reconcile, nor is it even safe. When we choose to forgive, we are essentially choosing to stop being a prisoner of our own pain. Psychologist Lewis Smedes writes, "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover the prisoner was you." Forgiveness is not saying that our pain is not real. It does not deny or minimize the harm, nor does it condone the act. Some things will never be okay to do. Forgiveness is also not about forgetting. Aside from the fact that any serious harm will likely be impossible to forget, these things shouldn't be forgotten. The goal is not to erase painful memories. The goal is to remember them differently. Frederick Luskin describes it this way. He says, "While lack of forgiveness is remembering something with an edge or a grudge or a sense of injustice, forgiveness means remembering it more benignly, with compassion. It involves some purpose of moving ahead rather than just being stuck in the past." Stuck in the past. That's why forgiveness is so important. When we don't forgive, we remain stuck. The anger, the resentment, the pain we feel turns into what some people have described as this hot burning coal that never goes away, that burns us from the inside out. And carrying burning coals, it affects us physically, emotionally, spiritually. When we carry these coals, we can suffer from depression, despair, we can have high blood pressure, we may feel worthless, empty. We may feel like a victim and lose our sense of power and autonomy. We may feel disconnected, spiritually numb, or abandoned by God. And so bitterness can allow us to lose the capacity to care about anything else except our pain. We lose our sense of self to that burning coal lodged in our hearts. Remaining stuck in victimhood is, in my experience, one of the single most soul-crushing actions that a person can do. Living in the past fosters pessimism and negativity. It sucks the life force right out of us and affects all areas of our lives. And when all we feel is that burning coal, it becomes easy to see the world through jaded and cynical eyes and lose sight of joy and optimism. Anger builds upon anger, resentment upon resentment, and bitterness upon bitterness. I've spent much of my life in this state of victimhood, with all the anger, resentment, and pain that goes with it. I was seriously harmed by someone so badly that I carried the pain with me most of my life. This person stole my voice, stole my ability to trust, my identity, and my joy in life. I lived every day of my life focused on that burning coal of anger, and I hated him, and I refused to let go of that death grip that I had on that anger. And I was in every way a victim. I felt sorry for myself, and like Cole in the reading earlier, I believed I had a right to my anger and that there was nothing I could do about it. I didn't choose it. How could I forgive someone for hurting me that badly? It wasn't until just a few years ago that I was able to find some sort of healing. With the help of some pretty amazing people in my home congregation, I learned how to let go a lot of that anger. They taught me about unconditional love, and they showed me that life is not all about pain. And I learned to try to imagine the pain this person must have been carrying that caused him to act the way he did. I didn't know much about him, but I did know that he came from an abusive, alcoholic family. That knowledge didn't excuse what he did, but when I began to see him in a more compassionate and empathetic light, I was able to let go of much of my anger, forgive, and begin to heal. And as that anger slowly dissipated, so did my pain. I began to step out of victimhood and into a new life, the life you see me building here and now. And I'm rediscovering who I am, and I'm finding that I do have a voice after all. And I discovered that I was able to a large degree to forgive this person, even though we never reconciled, because he died in 1999, 8 years before my epiphany. Being able to let go of this anger and resentment was life-giving to me. My soul was quite literally renewed. I received the gift of my life back from this act of forgiving. And that's not to say that sometimes I still don't feel his impact on my life. I do. I still carry some of that anger. But the rage is gone. And like the wise old Indian in our story said, the sky, the stick, hot dogs, life, it's all the same. It's what you make of it. What you focus on becomes reality. Everybody carries anger inside, but also happiness. Those who focus on anger will always be angry. And so by choosing not to focus on the anger, I've been able to regain control of my life rather than feel controlled by him or my memory of him. On my altar in my office, I have a little statue of the Hindu god Ganesh, the remover of obstacles. I think it's interesting that I'm talking about forgiveness today because next Thursday is the Hindu holiday of Diwali, or the Festival of Lights. And it's normally associated with themes such as light's victory over darkness, good over evil, but it's also a time of renewal of relationships and a cleansing of one's life. It's a time of garnering new hope for the coming year. Ganesh is a significant god associated with this holiday, and so I have to wonder that if praying to Ganesh is akin to praying for help, for forgiveness, for help removing the obstacle of anger, so that the light can defeat the dark, so that we may be cleansed and renewed. So maybe we all need a little Ganesh on our desks or nightstands, because forgiving is hard work. We need all the help we can get. I've spoken a lot so far about forgiving others. It's clear to me that not forgiving causes as much or more harm to ourselves than the original offense. It's like giving the person who harmed you a free pass to keep offending every single day of your life. Forgiving is not about the other person, unless the other person is you. What about forgiving ourselves? It's one thing to forgive someone else, but I think it's even harder to forgive ourselves. And the consequences of not forgiving ourselves can be even greater than not forgiving others. During my time as a hospital chaplain, I was present with a 30-year-old woman whose brother had just died of a heroin overdose, and she blamed herself for his death. She had loaned him some money that night so he could take his girlfriend out on an expensive date. She had no idea he was going to use the money to buy the drugs. Still, she blamed herself. She kept saying that she was a monster. And her pain was so great that she was just inconsolable. Not only was she dealing with the pain of losing her brother, but she added an enormous amount of pain, blaming herself for his death. I only saw her for that one night, but I still wonder about her. I wonder if she's still carrying around her burning coal. I truly hope that she's been able to let go. And from time to time, I'll send a prayer out to the universe that she might forgive herself. We all carry burdens of guilt and shame for things we've done, for the wrongs we've done, the ways we've hurt other people. How many times have you asked yourself, how could I have been so stupid? I'll never be able to live with myself for doing that. How much pain do you inflict on yourself in the form of negative self-talk and self-judgment? I think the truth of the matter is that many of us believe that we don't deserve forgiveness, that we are worthless or unlovable or less than. We talk ourselves into believing that we deserve to be punished, that we deserve to feel this pain because we're horrible people. And somewhere in the core of our being, we are sometimes convinced that we're justified in causing ourselves pain for what we did. Whether we need to forgive someone else or forgive ourselves, I think we should start by saying, I choose to release my anger to the extent that I am currently able, so that its negative effects don't continue to harm me. I believe that forgiveness is ultimately a product of this self-compassion. It's about caring for ourselves enough to stop causing ourselves pain. It's about being gentle with that human being, that soul inside. So, maybe forgiveness is a four-letter word after all. Love. Peace. Shalom. Shalom.